This video is going to show you 3 different ways of painting the same thing. The first way is just done with watercolor. I start out with a pencil sketch, and I'm going to want to erase as much of the pencil as I can and make it as light as possible. And then I am going to mix up my first color, just orange, into the lid of my palette. I do that because then I can control the amount of pigment to water, which is really important when you're figuring out how light or saturated you want your color to be. And then I'm just, painting that in to the main area of the orange. While it's still wet, you'll see that I'm adding a bit more dimension. So I add some kind of more red orange, I add some yellow, and I'm doing this wet into wet or charging technique in order to get those colors to kind of bleed and blend together. A little blue and orange complementary colors are going to make more of a neutral color, so I add that along where the bottom where I see the shadow. I'm using a clean, damp brush just to kind of soften up some of those shapes of darker and different colors there. And again, it's still wet, so these colors are continuing to kind of bleed and blend into the surface. I use a paper towel there for a little bit of a lifting out technique to get a highlight on the orange. And then adding just more saturated orange kind of around the area of the highlight to really make it look like this object is in fact orange. That's kind of the dominant color there. More softening with a clean, damp brush and charging more vibrant colors in. Now that it's dry, I can do some glazing. And glazing is when you just put wet paint over the top of a dry surface. What this allows me to do is really deepen and saturate those colors. So you'll see that I'm using the same colors I was using before, but because the underneath is dry, this allows it to kind of build up over the top. And just like when you put 2 pieces of stained glass together, you're going to get a more vibrant combination or more vibrant color as you put those 2 pieces together, those layers together. So again, just continuing to add more color in the areas that I see it and deepening and saturating the color of the tangerine. Now I can work in the leaf area as well. This is a separate boundary, so they won't bleed together. And I started out with just a wash technique here in the leaf. So plain fresh water, and then I charged the green color into it, and you can notice I'm also adding a little bit of variation here with some darker, cooler green, a little blue green. And then in this leaf that's kind of in shadow, it's more of a neutral or a muted green. So I'm actually using a combination of red and green because they're complementary colors which neutralize each other. And that gives me that nice kind of dark olive green that I'm looking for in that area. Adding a little bit of yellow, which is blending with that green and making kind of a yellow green and creating the look of highlights. And a little bit of reflected light bouncing off of the orange and back into the leaf. Now I'm using again blue and orange, which is a complementary color combination, and this is giving me that gray that I'm going to then put underneath the orange. Since the orange is dry, I can do this and it won't bleed together. And I'm just darkening right at the edge. For this next method, ink and watercolor, the pen is really going to do the bulk of the work in this style. So the pen is going to be what defines the shape, what creates the value, and you're going to spend some time really making a nice ink drawing of your object, and paying attention to the drawing itself rather than the painting, because the painting is just going to kind of add a splash of color. You might think about using certain kind of shading techniques, like I've chosen a cross-hatching technique here. So I'm beginning to build up some illusion of value, of shadow and of highlight by adding these nice little hatch marks, which I'm actually taking my time and spacing them out nicely. And then the more that you add and build up those hatch marks and cross hatch together, the more of an illusion of shadow you will be able to create. you don't have to use cross hatching. You could use other techniques, hatching, stippling, scumbling, or you could even vary the line quality of the outline of your object too. So, maybe having like a thicker, bolder outline where you see some shadow versus a light, wispy, delicate outline where there's highlight. It's really up to you, but I would say just, concentrate on making this a really beautiful pen drawing, and spend some time thinking about how you're going to create an interesting drawing made of ink. Because again, the color is just going to kind of add a little splash of fun and color. Once it's fully dry, then you're going to want to erase the pencil. And then I'm using a large brush here, and as you can see, I'm just kind of slopping the color on there, just jumping right into the palette and kind of throwing some orange and some red and some yellow. And I'm not even worried about staying inside the lines because the ink has really clear lines for me. So the color is just adding this little hint, this fun little splash. And even that cast shadow has a little bit of bleeding, but I love it. The third method is watercolor and colored pencil. And the watercolor is going to be basically the foundation of the color for this object. So as you can see, I'm using a large brush and just putting down clean, fresh water. And then I'm using this wash technique, kind of spreading out the color so it's just nice and even and smooth all over that form. I'm leaving a little bit of white area for the highlight of the orange, but otherwise it's just kind of an even all over orange color. And then in the leaf, obviously I'll want to have a green. So I do it the same green and throughout the leaf, and it's very simple and very basic. Then I'm going to let that fully dry before I do color pencil over the top. With color pencil, you're going to want to start with the lightest colors first, because it is easier to color over light colors than it is to color over dark colors. So I'm starting here around the highlight of the orange with my yellow orange, and then going in and adding a little bit of a layer, kind of overlapping with my pure orange. And notice how I'm tilting my pencils, so I'm using the side of the lead, not the tip of the lead. That's going to allow you to put down a beautiful, even, soft layer of your color pencil. It really kind of feels like painting more than drawing. And so this is a very gentle layering process. In the shadow area of the orange, I noticed that it's more red orange than dark orange. So that's why I use kind of that poppy red in the core of the shadow there. There are some areas that have a more muted orange or kind of a darker orange. And so I'm using the complementary color property and using some blue to just lay down a gentle layer of blue where I see kind of the darker shadows and the more neutral orange areas. And then I go back over with my pure orange and kind of stitch that together. And eventually, if you're doing this gently enough and you're layering enough, it will start to look like a true just blend of color and not like you're seeing blue underneath there. And so notice how many times I jump back and forth between my different colors, right? And just laying down these layers really lightly and really gently and overlapping them so that they start to seamlessly blend. And you really can't see where one color ends and another begins. Obviously in the leaves, I'm using some green here. I think I started out with kind of an olive green, and focusing again on where I see the shadows and the highlights, the neutral greens versus the kind of more vibrant yellow greens, using some yellow ochre, some apple green, and then again the olive. And I'm just focusing on the lights and shadows, and how the color in the leaves varies as well. I go back to the orange and I'm adding more layers. This is a layering process of my orange color. And, the more I lay the pencil down on the paper, the more kind of saturated it becomes, and the more the texture or the tooth of the paper flattens out, and the color really is beautiful and vibrant. For the shadow, I'm using kind of an indigo blue. Again, I'll do a gentle little layer of orange just to neutralize it a bit, and then darken right at the edge of that shadow. So which one do you like the best? This is the charged and glazed one. This is the ink and watercolor one. And then the color pencil and watercolor. Which one is your preference?